Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, into a world lit only by fire and stars. A time when sleep wasn't one long block. You'll experience the medieval night. Frankly, you probably won't survive its quiet with your phone buzzing. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Comment your location and time. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The sun, that glorious demanding taskmaster, is finally dipping below the tree line. You stand at the edge of a small clearing, your feet sinking just a little into the cool, damp earth of a medieval farm. The air thickens now, carrying the scent of wood smoke from the cottage chimney, a comforting, slightly acrid perfume that clings to everything. It mingles with the richer, earthier smells of turned soil, manure from the nearby byre, and the faint, sweet aroma of late wildflowers in the encroaching shadows of the forest. Watch as the sky bleeds from fiery orange and passionate pink to a softer and bruised purple. There's a profound stillness beginning to settle, broken only by the lowing of a cow being led to its shed, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, and perhaps the distant, mournful hoot of an early owl. Your own day, if you were living here, would have been long, filled with relentless physical labor from sunrise. Now, that familiar ache in your muscles, that deep-seated weariness, is a signal, not for a comfy couch and streaming services, but for something quite different. The last tasks are being seen to a wooden shutter, sturdy and simple, is barred across a small window. Tools, precious and hard-won, are wiped down and stored. There's no flicking of a switch to flood the yard with light, no street lamps to pierce the growing gloom. The darkness that approaches isn't just an absence of light, it's a presence, a heavy blanket slowly unfurling over the land. You can almost feel its weight, its texture. It's a darkness that our modern world has almost entirely banished. And perhaps, just perhaps, we've lost something in doing so. The chickens have long since roosted, their soft clucking now silenced. The dog, a scruffy, hard-working creature, lies by the door, thumping its tail once, twice, before settling with a sigh. This is the unwinding, medieval style. As the last sliver of sun vanishes, true night begins its reign. And with it comes a very different approach to sleep than you're probably used to. Forget your 8-hour unbroken slumber. That's a relatively modern invention, a byproduct of the Industrial Revolution and the artificial lighting that came with it. Here, you're about to experience what historians call segmented sleep, or biphasic sleep. This was, for centuries, the absolute norm. It's a fascinating concept. Instead of one long sleep, people would have 2 shorter sleeps, separated by a period of quiet wakefulness in the middle of the night. This isn't some niche practice. Evidence from diaries, medical texts, and literature across Europe and beyond suggests this pattern was incredibly common. So, as the farm settles into an almost profound silence, you're not preparing for an uninterrupted journey till dawn. You're preparing for your first sleep, a period of rest that will last a few hours, after which you'll naturally wake. This interim period, sometimes called the watch or the French dorveille, wasn't seen as insomnia or a problem to be solved with a pill. It was just normal, a natural pause in the night's proceedings. Imagine that, a time when waking in the middle of the night wasn't a cause for anxiety, but an expected interlude. We'll explore what you might do during that wakeful period later. But for now, the focus is on succumbing to that first wave of delicious earned exhaustion. The air inside the small timber-framed cottage is close. smoky from the day's cooking fire, which has now been carefully banked to smolder through the night. The concept of winding down is less about browsing social media and more about basic, essential actions. You might see the family, perhaps a farmer, his wife, a couple of children, maybe an elderly parent, moving with a slow, practiced economy of motion. Water, drawn earlier from the well, might be used for a very cursory wash of hands and face, if at all. Don't picture a sudsy warm bath. That's a luxury far beyond this setting. Think more of a damp cloth and a shiver. Any remaining embers in the hearth provide the only flickering, dancing light, casting long spooky shadows that writhe on the rough-hewn wooden walls. Clothes, simple tunics and leggings made of coarse wool or linen, are perhaps loosened or removed, but often people slept in some or all of their day clothes for warmth. Beds are, well, let's just say they're not Tempur-Pedic. You might find yourself on a straw-filled pallet on the floor, or if you're slightly more fortunate, a simple wooden bed frame with a straw mattress, perhaps shared with several other family members for warmth. Privacy is a modern luxury, much like spring-loaded mattresses. Before settling, prayers are almost certainly offered. Religion permeated every aspect of medieval life, and the vulnerability of the night, with its unknown terrors, both real and imagined, made appeals for divine protection a nightly ritual. It's a quiet, mumbled affair, a familiar comfort in the encroaching dark. There's a sense of surrender, of giving oneself over to the night and its rhythms. No checking your phone one last time. No, just one more episode. The day is done, truly done. And the darkness, oh, the darkness. It's something we can barely comprehend. Once that fire is fully banked, or the single, precious tallow candle, or smoky rushlight is extinguished to save it, the blackness is absolute. Imagine a power outage, but not just in your house or your street, but across the entire world as you know it. This is a darkness so profound it feels tangible. On a clear night, the moon and stars would be astonishingly bright, unpolluted by any man-made glow, and you'd navigate by their silvery light if you dared to step outside. But clouds could swallow even that, leaving you in a velvety, inky void. This is where the lack of modern light truly shapes the experience. Rushlights, for instance, were a common, cheap form of lighting for poorer folk. These were made by dipping the dried pith of a rush plant into animal fat. A quirky little tidbit for you, a typical foot-long rushlight might only burn for about 30 to 60 minutes, and it would give off a rather pungent, greasy smoke. Not exactly mood lighting for your late-night reading, unless your reading material was, say, the back of your eyelids. Candles made of beeswax were far superior, burning cleaner and longer, but they were incredibly expensive, reserved for the wealthy or for churches. So, for most, the night was unlit. Historians still argue whether this deep, pervasive darkness fostered a greater sense of community and reliance on one another within the household, or if it amplified fears of the supernatural and the unknown dangers lurking just beyond the door. It certainly made that period of wakefulness between sleeps a very different experience than just flicking on a lamp. The world shrinks to the immediate, the tactile, the sounds your own breathing makes in the quiet. It's a far cry from our brightly lit nights, isn't it? Almost makes you appreciate that annoying street light outside your window. Almost. The last sliver of orange has bled from the western sky, leaving behind a deep, velvety indigo. Remember that fan we talked about for the soft background hum? Well, out here, nature provides its own white noise, though it's far from white. It's more of a rich, loamy brown noise, if you will. The air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and cooling hay, grows still. You're lying on your simple straw-filled mattress, surprisingly comfortable. Or maybe you're just that tired from a day of, well, existing before Netflix. Your eyelids, which felt merely heavy a little while ago, now seem to be auditioning for the role of lead weights in a very niche, very sleepy play. This isn't the fraught, phone-scrolling, anxiety-tinged drift-off many of us experience today. No, this is different. Your body, finely tuned to the rhythms of the sun, something our internal clocks still desperately crave, understands the cue. The pineal gland, that little pea-sized wizard in your brain, has been dutifully pumping out melatonin ever since the light began to fade. A natural, bespoke sleeping potion. No prescription needed. It's funny, isn't it? We spend fortunes on sleep aids, blue light filters, and blackout curtains, all to replicate what happened automatically for millennia. Perhaps we should just try, being really, really tired from actual labor. Radical. I know. You feel your muscles still humming faintly from the day's exertions, mending that bit of fence, hauling water, or perhaps just vigorously churning butter because, hey, it was Tuesday. Begin to truly release. Each breath out carries a little more tension with it, a slow deflation of worries. The day's events, once sharp and demanding, now blur at the edges, like watercolors left in the rain. There's a profound sense of surrender as you sink deeper into the rough-spun linen sheets. They're not 1,000 thread count Egyptian cotton, but they have a certain rustic honesty, a slight scratchiness that's almost grounding. Outside, the farm is performing its nightly symphony of subsidence. The clucking of the hens as they jostled for the best roosting spots has long since faded. Now, it's the occasional soft moo from the byre, a low, contented sound that rumbles through the stillness. A pig might grunt in its sleep, a surprisingly human noise that could make you chuckle. If you weren't already halfway to dreamland, the rustle in the thatch above your head could be mice, tiny feet scurrying on their nocturnal errands, or it could just be the house itself, sighing as it settles. You tell yourself it's the house, definitely the house. This descent isn't a jarring plunge, but a gentle spiraling slide into what folks back then, and indeed for much of human history, knew as the first sleep. That's right. Sleep wasn't always the consolidated 8-hour block we aspire to, and often fail to achieve. For centuries, segmented sleep was the norm for many. People would sleep for a few hours, wake up for a bit, and then go back for a second sleep. This wasn't seen as insomnia. It was just how sleep worked. It's a mainstream historical fact, well documented by folks like Roger E. Kirch, who pored over old diaries and letters. So, if you ever find yourself wide awake at 3 a.m., don't panic. You might just be tapping into your ancestral sleep patterns, or you drank too much coffee. One of the two. The darkness in the room is profound, an inky blackness that modern eyes, accustomed to the pervasive glow of streetlights and standby LEDs, rarely encounter. It's so complete that, if you were to open your eyes, you'd see little difference from when they were closed. This absolute dark is crucial, allowing your brain to fully switch off, to enter that initial, deeply restorative phase. You can feel the coolness of the night air seeping in, perhaps through a poorly sealed window frame or under the door. It carries the faintest scent of wood smoke from a distant, dying hearth, or maybe the wild mint growing by the stream. A quirky little tidbit for you. Many people in earlier times were quite wary of the night air, believing it could carry miasmas or ill humors. So, windows would often be shuttered tight, making rooms quite stuffy, especially in summer. You, however, might have left a tiny crack open, for which your 21st century lungs are probably grateful, even if your 18th century self might be a bit nervous about phantom vapors. The sounds continue, but they're no longer distinct. They merge, becoming part of the texture of the encroaching sleep. The distant hoot of an owl, a mournful, searching call, isn't a disturbance, it's a lullaby. The creak of a floorboard in another part of the small cottage isn't alarming, it's just the house breathing. Your own heartbeat slows, a steady, muffled drum against the quiet. You might feel a slight twitch in your leg, a hypnic jerk, as your conscious mind finally relinquishes control to the more ancient, primal parts of your brain that govern rest. This first sleep is often the deepest. It's where the body does its most significant repair work, where memories are consolidated, and where the true unwinding happens. There's a delicious sense of oblivion to it, a complete detachment from the waking world. Historians still argue whether the quiet period of wakefulness that often followed this first sleep, that dorveille, or watching time, was primarily for quiet contemplation and prayer, or if, for many, it also offered a unique window for intimacy, creative thought, or even some light chores by moonlight or embers. A little nocturnal multitasking, if you will. But that's for later. Right now, there's only the profound, irresistible pull downwards. Your thoughts, if any still flicker, are like a candle flame guttering in a breeze, about to extinguish. There's no resistance left in you. The world outside, the farm, the rustling thatch, the distant owl, all of it is fading, receding as if you're slowly sinking into warm, dark water. The boundary between your body and the bed, between your breath and the night air, dissolves. You are simply, falling into that rich, dark, utterly necessary first sleep. The kind of sleep that knits up the raveled sleeve of care, as someone rather famous once put it. And oh, how your particular sleeve needs knitting tonight. Your entire being yields, welcoming the deep, untroubled slumber that blankets the land and everyone upon it. And so, after what feels like a perfectly natural span of slumber, your eyes gently, almost imperceptibly, drift open. There's no jolt, no sudden intrusion of sound or light yanking you from the depths. It's more like a soft unfurling, a petal opening in the pre-dawn quiet. You're simply awake. You lie there for a moment, suspended in the velvety darkness, letting your senses slowly re-engage with the world. The first thing you notice, or perhaps don't notice, is the silence. It's profound. Isn't it? A silence so deep it feels almost like a substance. A soft, heavy blanket wrapped around your home, around your street, perhaps even around the entire sleeping world. It's nothing like the quiet of a daytime library, which is really just a collection of tiny, suppressed noises. A turned page, a soft cough, the click of a pen. No, this is different. This is the quiet hour, the true stillness that settles when human activity has largely ceased. You can hear the subtle hum of your own body, the gentle rhythm of your breath, the soft thrum of your heart. Maybe a floorboard creaks somewhere in the house, settling in the cool night air. A sound that would be utterly lost in the daytime cacophony. It's the kind of quiet that lets your thoughts stretch out, unhurried, unpushed. You realize just how rare this sensation is in our modern lives, always buzzing with the thrum of refrigerators, the distant drone of traffic, the constant, insidious whisper of notifications waiting just beyond our eyelids. And in this darkness, cocooned by the silence, you find yourself remarkably alert. Not in that frantic, cortisol-spiked way you might feel if an unexpected noise had startled you. This is a calm, lucid alertness. Your mind feels clean, uncluttered, like a desk that's been magically cleared overnight, ready for new thoughts, or perhaps just ready to be still. ideas might begin to surface, unbidden, connections forming with an easy grace that daytime pressures often stifle. It's a state that many throughout history cherished, this interlude between sleeps. Before the pervasive glow of artificial light and the tyranny of the 9 to 5, or should I say, the always-on segmented sleep was quite common. People would wake after their first sleep, engage in quiet activities for an hour or two, and then return to bed for their second sleep. This wasn't seen as insomnia. It was just the rhythm of the night. You feel it now, this sense of having stolen time. Dawn is still a while away. The digital clock on your nightstand, if you dare to peek, might show an hour that feels almost illicit to be awake during 2 a.m., 3 a.m. These are the hours of deep sleep, or so our modern sleep gurus tell us. Yet here you are, perfectly awake, surprisingly refreshed, and with a delicious, almost secretive feeling of having time that belongs entirely to you. There are no demands, no emails pinging for your attention, no social media feeds scrolling endlessly with updates you didn't ask for. The world is asleep, and you, in your quiet bubble, are the sole conscious inhabitant of your immediate universe. It's like discovering a hidden room in your own house, a tranquil space you never knew existed. Our ancestors, well, some of them anyway, would use this time for all sorts of things. The famous diarist Samuel Pepys, back in the 17th century, often mentioned waking in the night, sometimes to write, sometimes to chat with his wife, or even to deal with a troublesome bedbug or two, which, frankly, makes our modern anxieties seem a bit tame. He just jotted it down. Another part of the day, or night as it were. Now, contrast this gentle, natural reemergence into consciousness with the typical modern awakening. Imagine, if you will, the alternative, which, for most of us, is the daily reality. That piercing, brutal shriek of the alarm clock, that sound, so carefully engineered to be as offensive as possible to the human nervous system. It's less of an awakening and more of an assault, isn't it? You're ripped from sleep, your heart instantly pounding, your mind still thick with grogginess, forced into an immediate state of high alert. One moment you're dreaming of flying, or finally organizing your sock drawer, and the next, beep, you're wrestling with the existential dread of Monday morning, or Tuesday, or, let's be honest, any morning that starts with that unholy noise. The snooze button becomes a little 5-minute torture device, a brief reprieve before the inevitable sonic bludgeoning resumes. It's like someone repeatedly splashing cold water on your face while yelling, "Productivity awaits, you slacker." The difference is palpable, isn't it? This quiet hour awakening feels like a gift. The forced alarm feels like a punishment for daring to rest. In this natural state, your body and mind have come to wakefulness on their own terms, in their own time. There's no groggy fog to fight through, no desperate fumbling for the caffeine drip, just a clear, calm awareness. It makes you wonder what we've lost in our relentless pursuit of consolidated 8-hour, no interruption sleep, a model that might not even be our most natural state. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of artificial lighting was the sole executioner of this segmented sleep pattern, or if the demands of a more regimented industrial workday played an equally, if not more significant role in consolidating our slumber into one long, hopefully uninterrupted block. Perhaps our ancestors, with their first sleep and second sleep, knew something we've forgotten, or have been forced to forget by the relentless tick-tock of modern scheduling. They might look at our sleep tracking apps and our desperate attempts to optimize our rest with a kind of bemused pity. You need an app for that, they might chuckle, before rolling over to enjoy another hour of quiet contemplation. Or, some quality time with their spouse before the rooster even thought about clearing its throat. The luxury. Hey, this quiet hour is a little reminder of that older, perhaps gentler, rhythm. A space where thoughts can breathe and the soul can simply be. And so the deep cloak of night, that velvet quiet we talked about, truly settles around you. It's not a time for grand pronouncements, or, heaven forbid, anything too strenuous. No, this is the hour of small, necessary things. The night watch isn't just about staring into the inky blackness, hoping nothing with too many teeth stares back. It's also about chores. Thrilling. I know, but there's a certain peace to be found in these quiet, methodical tasks, performed by the soft, flickering glow of the firelight, or perhaps the even softer kiss of the moon, if she's feeling generous. Your first, and arguably most constant companion in this endeavor, is the fire. Remember that chill we felt creeping in earlier, just as the last of the sun's warmth bled from the sky? The fire is your steadfast guardian against that. You drift towards it, feeling the gentle bloom of warmth on your face. The embers pulse with a life of their own, a deep, contented orange sighing beneath the logs. You reach for another piece of seasoned wood, not too large. You don't want a sudden inferno, just a steady, reliable burn. The dry bark feels rough, yet familiar under your fingertips. You place it carefully, angling it just so, coaxing the flames to lick at its edges. There's a soft hiss, a crackle, then a series of pops, like tiny contented applause. The smoke, thin and bluish, curls upwards, carrying the scent of pine or oak, a perfume far more ancient and comforting than anything you'd find in a modern bottle. You watch the shadows dance on the walls of your shelter, elongating and then shrinking. A silent puppet show played out for an audience of one. It's almost hypnotic, isn't it? This simple act of tending a flame, it's a core human experience, really. The control of fire, allowing us to cook, to stay warm, to ward off the things that go bump in the night. That was one of the biggest game changers in human history. Without it, well, let's just say our ancestors would have had significantly more brisk evenings and a far less varied diet. You adjust a log with a sturdy stick, watching the sparks fly up like short-lived stars. It's funny. We have all this technology now to keep us warm, thermostats and heated blankets. But there's still something deeply satisfying about this primal connection to a living flame. It's the original background app, always running, always needing a little nudge. Once the fire is settled, purring like a giant, fiery cat, you might turn your attention to the other living beings under your care. If you have any livestock, a few precious goats, perhaps, or some easily startled chickens, maybe even a grumpy old donkey who thinks he's the boss. This is the time for a quiet check. You move slowly, your feet scuffing softly on the earth or straw. The air in their enclosure is thick with their scent, that uniquely animal smell, a blend of warm bodies, hay, and damp earth. It's not unpleasant, just real. You listen, the soft snuffling sounds of sleep, a gentle chewing of cud, perhaps a sleepy bleat or a low moo. These are good sounds, reassuring. You peer into the gloom, your eyes now well adjusted to the low light. You can make out their shapes, huddled together for warmth and security. A goat might lift its head, its eyes reflecting the distant firelight like twin embers. You murmur a few soft words, nothing specific, just a low, calming tone. Modern folks have baby monitors for their kids, or pet cams to check on their furry overlords. This is the ancient equivalent, a personal, tactile reassurance. You're checking for any signs of distress, any unusual restlessness that might signal a predator lurking nearby or an illness taking hold. Sometimes, you'll find a quirky little belief attached to these nightly rounds. Some old tales suggest that if a certain animal is particularly restless, it might be an omen. For instance, it was sometimes believed that the specific, almost mournful cry of a fox at an unusual hour could foretell a sudden change in weather, or perhaps even a spot of bad luck for the community. Not that you're necessarily buying into that, but it does make you listen a little more intently to that rustle in the undergrowth, doesn't it? You give a final, gentle pat to a warm, woolly back, and then you withdraw, leaving them to their slumber. Next on the agenda, while the world outside is still and quiet, is a bit of prep for the day to come. Your tools, they're your livelihood, your means of survival. Really, you gather them in the dim light: an axe, a knife, perhaps a hoe or a small adze. The cool, smooth feel of a wooden handle, worn by use, is grounding. The faint glint of moonlight or firelight on a sharpened edge is a subtle reminder of its purpose. You might have a whetstone, its surface gritty and weighting. The rhythmic shh, shh of steel on stone is one of an array of quiet night sounds, a meditative whisper in the darkness. You're not trying to reforge the thing, just maintain that keen edge, ensuring it's ready for whatever tomorrow throws at you. Chopping wood, clearing brush, preparing food. You check the bindings, making sure the axe head is secure, the knife handle solid. Perhaps you have a little pot of animal fat or plant-based oil, and you carefully rub a thin layer onto the metal to prevent rust and onto the wood to keep it from cracking. It's a slow, deliberate process. There's a certain respect you develop for these objects. They're extensions of your own hands, your own will. Historians still argue whether the meticulous care of everyday tools was a widespread individual responsibility, with everyone knowing the basics of maintenance, or if even in smaller, less complex settlements, there were individuals who naturally took on the role of the go-to person for more specialized repairs and sharpening. Either way, right now, it's just you and your tools, in the quiet companionship of the night. It's not unlike plugging in your phone before bed, or setting out your coffee stuff for the morning. A little bit of effort now saves a lot of fumbling and frustration later. You wouldn't want to face a charging boar, or even just a stubborn tree root, with a dull axe. That's the kind of mistake you generally only make once. And finally, if there's still a stretch of your watch left, and the fire is behaving, and the animals are quiet, you might turn your hand to small repairs. These are the little fixes that keep life from unraveling, quite literally sometimes. Maybe there's a tear in your tunic, snagged on a branch earlier in the day. By the flickering light, you thread a bone or a bronze needle, if you're lucky enough to have one, with coarse linen or woolen thread. The repetitive motion of stitching is surprisingly calming. Or perhaps a leather strap on a sandal has come loose. You'd work some softened beeswax into the new thong to make it supple and water-resistant before carefully rethreading it. You might find yourself whittling a new peg for a wobbly stool, or rebinding a loose handle on a basket with strips of willow bark or sinew. These aren't heroic tasks. No one's going to sing sagas about the night you perfectly darned your sock, but they are essential. Every small repair is an act of conservation, of making things last in a world where resources are precious and replacements aren't just a click away. It's the ultimate anti-throwaway culture. Imagine trying to explain fast fashion to someone meticulously patching a garment they expect to last for years. They'd probably think you were a bit soft in the head. These quiet moments of mending, of making whole again, are a gentle counterpoint to the wildness that might be prowling just beyond your small circle of light. Each task, performed in the hushed stillness, is a thread in the fabric of survival, a quiet assertion of order against the encroaching dark. And who knows, maybe that perfectly whittled tent peg will be the difference between a dry night's sleep and a very damp, very grumpy awakening. It's the little things. You see, always the little things. Nos, right. So the silence, that deep, almost humming quiet of the pre-dawn hours, it can be a companion. But sometimes you crave a different kind of presence. After all, even with the weight of the community's safety, metaphorically, on your shoulders, remember how heavy those imaginary epaulets felt. You're still human, and humans. Well, we're social creatures, even when we're supposed to be diligently scanning the shadows for, well, more shadows, usually. So, the watch period? It isn't always just about solitary vigilance or listening for the telltale scuffle of a stray cat that sounds suspiciously like a nefarious plotter. It's also, surprisingly often, a time for quiet social interactions. Think of it as the original co-working space, but with more cobblestones and a significantly higher chance of encountering someone who genuinely believes the moon is made of cheese. You find yourself, perhaps after a particularly uneventful hour, your eyes a little gritty from staring into the inky blackness, feeling the pull to connect, just for a moment. This is when you might indulge in a bit of neighborly visiting, not a boisterous door-flinging kind of visit, mind you. Oh no, this is an art form in hushed communication. You slip away from your designated patrol path, just for a little while. The sound of your soft-soled shoes, like we discussed for optimal stealth, barely registering on the damp ground. You approach a familiar shuttered window, one where you know a kindred spirit, perhaps another member of the watch from a different household, or just a fellow night owl might be awake. A soft tap, a prearranged signal, maybe 3 quick knocks, then a pause, then 2 more. Nothing that would alarm the truly sleeping. The shutter creaks open just a sliver of warm, dim light spilling out, painting a fleeting stripe across your face. Inside, you see a familiar face, eyes crinkling in a sleepy smile. You exchange hushed greetings, your voices barely above a whisper, the kind of whisper that feels intimate and conspiratorial. All quiet on your end. You might murmur and they'll nod, perhaps adding, "Heard old man Hemlock's goat got loose again," caused a bit of a stir down by the bakers. It's the news of the night, the micro-gossip that keeps the small hours from feeling too vast, too isolating. These aren't earth-shattering revelations, mostly just the gentle hum of everyday life continuing even under the cloak of darkness. It's comforting, in a way. You lean against the cold stone wall, the faint scent of wood smoke, or perhaps stored apples drifting from within. And for a few precious minutes, you're not just a watchman, you're part of this slumbering, breathing community, connected by these stolen moments of quiet conversation. Sharing these snippets makes the long hours a little shorter, the darkness a little less. Dark. And then there's the story sharing. If you're lucky, or perhaps a little daring, you might find a small group, maybe 2 or 3 others, huddled in a slightly more sheltered spot, an alcove, a recessed doorway, or even, if the weather is truly foul, a quickly commandeered and just as quickly vacated shed. The light source here is crucial and almost always pathetic. A single, sputtering tallow candle, casting enormous dancing shadows that make everyone look vaguely sinister, or the dying embers of a carefully banked fire, providing more warmth than actual illumination. By this faint, flickering glow, stories are woven. These aren't the grand, sweeping epics recited in the mead hall. These are the night tales, the ones that thrive in the gloom. Ghost stories, of course, are a perennial favorite, each unexplained creak from a nearby building adding an impromptu sound effect. You'll hear tales of local legends, the mischievous spirits said to inhabit the old mill, or the phantom dog that roams the churchyard. Sometimes it's personal anecdotes, embellished for dramatic effect, recounting a near miss with a clumsy thief or a comical encounter with a sleepwalking burgher. The oral tradition was incredibly strong, you see. This was how history, entertainment, and even warnings were passed down long before everyone had a glowing rectangle in their pocket to scroll through. You might hear a story that's been told for generations, its edges softened and its details shifted with each retelling, much like trying to remember the exact plot of that dream you had last Tuesday. There's a magic to it, this sharing of narratives by such faint light, your faces leaning in, a small circle of humanity against the vast, indifferent night. It's the ancient equivalent of a late-night podcast. Really, just with a much higher chance of actual bats. Now, beyond the friendly chat and the shared spooky story, the Night Watch also offered a discreet veil for, well, for more private, clandestine meetings. Historians still argue whether the primary motivation for some of these nocturnal wanderings was genuine community bonding, or if the watch simply provided convenient cover for activities best kept from the prying eyes of daylight. It's likely a bit of both, isn't it? The darkness, the quiet, the general understanding that most respectable folk are tucked up in bed. It all creates an atmosphere ripe for secrecy. Imagine two young lovers, their families perhaps disapproving of their match. The Night Watch offers those precious, stolen moments. A whispered exchange of sweet nothings in a shadowy archway. A quickly snatched kiss under the unblinking gaze of the moon, assuming it's not hidden by clouds. Of course, there's a thrill to it, the risk of discovery adding a certain spice that a perfectly sanctioned courtship just can't replicate. It's far more daring than sending a risky text message today, with potentially much more immediate and awkward consequences if caught. But it wasn't all youthful romance. These clandestine meetings could also be for more serious, or at least more adult purposes. Perhaps it's a quiet negotiation between two merchants, trying to hash out a deal away from competitors' ears. Or maybe it's something a little more sensitive. Whispers of discontent, hushed discussions about unpopular new taxes, or the overbearing nature of a local official. The night could be a surprisingly political space, a quirky little tidbit for you in some places. There were even specific, almost codified ways of arranging these secret meetings. Little signs or signals left during the day that only the initiated would understand, indicating a time and place for a nocturnal rendezvous. It's like a real-life spy game, but with less cool gadgets and probably more mud. These encounters, whether they're share innocent chats, spine-tingling tales, or secret trysts, all serve to humanize the night. They remind you that even in the deepest, darkest hours, when the world seems to hold its breath, life, in its myriad forms, continues. It's a subtle tapestry woven in whispers and shadows, a testament to our enduring need to connect, to share, and sometimes to conspire, even when the rest of the world is dreaming. And as your watch continues, these fleeting interactions become little pinpricks of light in the vast darkness, making the long vigil just a little more bearable, a little more alive. The murmur of your watch companion eventually fades, or perhaps they've simply achieved a new level of stoic immobility, a skill you're still aspiring to. The shared, slightly tense energy of the earlier hours, remember that, when every shadow seemed to hold a potential threat or a really bad bard that dissipates, leaving a different kind of quiet. This is your time. The tower, the wall, the gatehouse, wherever your post might be. It becomes a solitary cell, a monk's retreat, but with slightly worse insulation and a much higher chance of being interrupted by, actual trouble. So, What do you do with this precious chilly solitude if you're inclined? This is when the soft prayers begin. Your lips move, almost silently, forming words that have been spoken for centuries. Maybe you have a string of worn wooden beads, like those little worry stones people fiddle with today, each one a marker in a familiar litany. You feel the cool, slightly rough texture under your thumb as you cycle through them. There's no grand cathedral echo here, just the vast, indifferent expanse of the night sky and the faint, almost imperceptible hum of the sleeping town below. It's a very personal connection, a direct line. You hope to whatever power you believe watches over the watchers. You're not expecting a burning bush, just a little comfort, a little strength to get through till dawn, or maybe just for your feet to stop aching. Priorities, right? Or perhaps it's not formal prayer, but a quieter kind of communion. Meditation. You let your gaze soften, focusing on a distant star, or the way the moonlight, if there is any, catches the edge of a battlement. You try to quiet the inner chatter, the endless loop of worries and what-ifs. It's a bit like trying to get your brain to defragment after a long day of processing, well, medieval stimuli. You breathe in the cold, damp air, feeling it fill your lungs, and breathe out the day's frustrations. The sounds of the night, once a source of alarm, become a kind of white noise. The hoot of an owl, the rustle of unseen creatures in the undergrowth, the distant bark of a dog. It's surprisingly peaceful when you're not convinced every noise is a goblin coming to steal your socks. Historians still argue whether such practices were widespread or more the domain of the particularly devout. But the human need for stillness, for a moment to simply be all-e, is timeless. Then there's good old-fashioned quiet contemplation. Thinking. Just thinking. You replay the day's events, the faces you saw, the words exchanged, that argument with the baker over the price of, well, anything. The brief, unexpected kindness from a stranger. You ponder the bigger questions too, if you're feeling particularly philosophical, or if the sheer immensity of the starlit sky has that effect on you. Why are we here? What's it all for? Is that cheese vendor really giving you the oldest wheels? Life's great mysteries, pondered under the cloak of night. It's like your own private podcast, only the host is you, and the topics are deeply personal, occasionally existential, and often involve figuring out how to get a warmer cloak, if you're practical. And let's face it, survival in these times demands a certain practicality. This is when you might pull out a needle and thread. Mending. That tear in your tunic from where you snagged it on. Oh, let's say a suspiciously sharp door frame, or reinforcing a button on your gambeson that's seen better days. The repetitive motion of the needle, in and out, can be quite meditative in itself. You're not aiming for haute couture, just something that will keep the wind out and hold together for another week. The light is terrible, of course. You're probably squinting, holding the fabric close to your face, relying more on feel than sight. It's a quiet, useful occupation, a small act of order against the encroaching chaos, or at least against the encroaching cold. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Some folk believed that mending clothes by moonlight, especially with thread that had been blessed or spun under specific conditions, could imbue the garment with extra luck or protection. Probably didn't stop a crossbow bolt. But you know, every little bit of psychological armor helps. And then, for the truly fortunate, for the literate few, there is reading. This is a rare luxury. Remember, books are painstakingly copied by hand, incredibly valuable. If you possess one, or even a few pages of one, you guard it closely. Perhaps it's a psalter, the Latin verses familiar and comforting, even if your grasp of the language is a bit shaky. Or maybe it's a well-loved story, a romance of chivalry and daring deeds, a world away from the gritty reality of your watch. You might have a horn book, that simple wooden paddle with the alphabet and Lord's Prayer, a reminder of early lessons. You'd be hunched over, trying to catch the faint glow from a carefully shielded lantern, or perhaps just the moonlight, the vellum or rough paper cool beneath your fingers, the smell of old ink, the crackle of the page. It's an escape. The mainstream historical fact here is that literacy was not widespread at all. For much of the medieval period, the ability to read and write was confined largely to the clergy and some nobility. So, if you're reading, you're already in a pretty exclusive club. You're basically the medieval equivalent of someone who understands blockchain. All these solitary activities, the prayer, the meditation, the mending, the reading, the quiet reflection, they all tap into the unique atmosphere of the night. There's a stripping away of the day's distractions. The world is quieter, smaller, more focused. It's a time when the veil between the mundane and the spiritual, or simply the mundane and your own inner thoughts, feels thinner. You're not just guarding a physical space, you're also in a space where you can tend to your own inner world. The darkness isn't just an absence of light, it's a canvas for your thoughts, your hopes, your quiet anxieties, and perhaps even a moment to figure out just who stole your favorite whittling knife last week. The night watch is long, and a person needs more than just keen eyes to pass the hours. They need these small rituals, these personal moments, to keep the soul, as well as the body, intact until the first hint of dawn. Okay, so now the sun has well and truly set, hasn't it? And when I say set, I mean it's gone. There's no friendly orange glow from the streetlights outside your window, no distant hum of traffic creating a perpetual twilight. You're plunged into a darkness so profound, so absolute. It's almost a physical presence. Imagine the darkest room you've ever been in, maybe during a power cut, and then multiply that by 1,000. Your phone screen on its lowest setting, if you somehow magicked one back here, would probably be visible from the next village over, like a tiny anachronistic supernova. The only light, if you're lucky, comes from the moon, a sliver or a full ash-cold disk casting stark shadows, or perhaps the faint, impossibly distant glitter of stars on a cloudy, moonless night. Though, well, you can't see your hand in front of your face. Literally. You're moving through a world painted in shades of deepest black and charcoal gray, relying on memory and touch far more than sight. Remember those uneven floors we talked about inside the cottage. Navigating your own home becomes a careful, shuffling dance. Stepping outside is an act of considerable bravery, or perhaps foolishness. And in this inky blackness, your other senses begin to awaken, to sharpen in ways they rarely do in our brightly lit, noisy modern world. Your ears, especially, become your primary guides. The silence, at first, might seem absolute, but lean into it. Listen past the gentle thumping of your own heart. Hear that? The wind. It's not just a gentle breeze. It's a character in the night's play. It whispers and sighs through the thatch of the roof above you. If you're inside, or if you've dared to step out, it might moan through the trees in the nearby woods, a mournful, lonely sound. It finds every crack in the wattle and daub walls, every gap in the wooden shutters, and it makes them sing, or creak, or rattle. A loose shutter banging in the wind could sound like a giant knocking for entry. Then there are the animal sounds, amplified by the stillness. The hoot of an owl, sudden and close, can make you jump. It's not the cute storybook owl. It's a hunter, unseen, its call echoing through the darkness. You might hear the rustling of small creatures in the undergrowth, or, depending on where your little medieval abode is situated, Perhaps the distant howl of a wolf? Yes, actual wolves. Forget your white noise machine with its gentle forest sounds. Medieval night was the original organic, free-range soundscape, with a slight, but not insignificant, chance of actual wolves adding their voices to the chorus. Inside, you might hear the soft stirrings of any animal sharing your space, a pig grunting in its corner, a chicken muttering in its sleep. Even the scuttling of a mouse in the walls sounds unnervingly loud. Distant noises carry with an incredible clarity you wouldn't expect. A dog barking miles away, a sudden shout from a neighboring village, the creak of a cartwheel from a traveler moving very, very late, or very, very early. You might even hear the distant toll of a church bell, marking the hours, or, more significantly, the curfew. That's a mainstream historical fact for you. The curfew bell, free, from the old French couvre-feu, meaning cover fire, was a signal for people to bank their fires for the night to prevent accidental blazes, a huge danger in towns built mostly of wood and thatch. It was a sound that regulated the rhythm of the night for everyone, and the smells. Oh, the smells of the medieval night are something else entirely. There's no escaping the scent of woodsmoke. It clings to everything, your clothes, your hair, the very air you breathe. It might be the comforting smell of your own dying hearth, or the acrid tang of your neighbor's poorly burning fire. Mixed with that is the smell of the earth itself, damp soil, decaying leaves, the raw, untamed scent of the natural world pressing in. If it's rained, the air is thick with the smell of wet wool, damp thatch, and the heavy, loamy aroma of the fields. There's a certain pungency to the medieval night, a richness of odors that we've largely filtered out of our sanitized modern lives. You might catch a whiff of livestock, a nearby midden, or even the faint, metallic scent of distant water if there's a river or lake close by. These aren't always pleasant, but they are undeniably real. Then there's the cold. Unless you're huddled right next to the embers of that covered fire, the cold is a constant companion. It seeps through the walls, through the floor, through the very blankets you might have pulled around you. This isn't the dry, centrally heated cold you might feel if you turn your thermostat down too low. It's a damp, penetrating chill that settles in your bones. You feel it on your cheeks, your nose, your fingertips. You pull your rough-spun cloak or blanket tighter, burrowing into straw bedding if you have it, seeking any pocket of warmth. Remember how we talked about those simple, medieval dwellings? There's no double glazing here, no insulation beyond what nature or rudimentary building techniques provide. You feel the environment in a very direct way. This raw sensory immersion is what truly defines the medieval night. It's a far cry from simply being in the dark. It's an experience that heightens some senses while diminishing others, creating a unique perception of the world. It's fascinating, too, how people interpreted these intense sensory inputs. Here's a quirky tidbit. Many medieval people genuinely believed that some of the strange sounds of the night, the whistling wind, the cries of unseen animals, the rustling in the deep woods, were caused by supernatural beings. Fairies, spirits, mischievous imps, or even the terrifying wild hunt, a spectral procession thundering through the sky. It's easy to understand why, when every creak and whisper is magnified 100-fold in the oppressive darkness. Historians still argue whether the medieval fear of the night was primarily rooted in these real dangers: the wolves, the possibility of getting lost or attacked, the accidents that could happen in the pitch black, or if it was more deeply entwined with superstitious beliefs, magnified and given form by the profound absence of light. Perhaps it was a potent cocktail of both. After all, when you can't see what's making that eerie scratching sound just outside your flimsy door, your imagination, fueled by stories in the unknown, can conjure up all sorts of terrifying possibilities. And you thought your roommate, who never opens a window, creating their own special miasma, was bad. At least you usually have electric light and solid walls between you and whatever is rustling outside. Here, the boundary between your small, fragile human world and the vast, untamed, and often unseen natural world is incredibly thin, almost permeable, especially once the sun goes down. You are truly at the mercy of the elements and the environment in a way we rarely, if ever, experience today. The night wasn't just a time of day, it was an entirely different realm. So as you lie there, in that quiet space between sleeps, the dorveille we've been exploring, it's not all just peaceful contemplation or, finally getting around to darning those socks by moonlight. Your mind, even if it's a bit fuzzy, knows that the world outside your thin walls hasn't just paused. The night, especially the medieval night, isn't merely the absence of sun. It's a different realm, one that holds its own distinct set of, let's call them, opportunities for adventure. If by adventure you mean potential peril, you shift, perhaps on your straw-filled mattress, and the rustle sounds unnaturally loud in the stillness. It's in these moments that the real dangers start to prickle at the edges of your awareness, out in the countryside, or even on the fringes of a town. The wild is much closer than it is for many of us today. You might hear a sound, a distant howl. Is it just a dog or is it a wolf, emboldened by the dark, perhaps sniffing around for an unwary chicken, or heaven forbid, a stray sheep? Remember how vital those animals are to your livelihood. Losing one isn't just an inconvenience, it's a blow to your family's survival. Bears and wild boars, depending on your particular neck of the woods, are also not unheard of nocturnal ramblers. They're usually more scared of you, but usually is a thin blanket when you're considering what might be snuffling just beyond your door. You don't exactly have a reinforced steel security door, do you? More like a sturdy wooden one, with a bar across it if you're fortunate. Then there are the two-legged predators, thieves and vagabonds. The night is their cloak, their accomplice. While the town watch, those dutiful, if sometimes dozy individuals we've mentioned, patrols the main thoroughfares, their shouts of "all's well, okay" echoing reassuringly. They can't be everywhere. It's a mainstream historical fact that towns of any significant size employed watchmen whose duties included not only crime prevention and fire watching, but also calling out the hours. Their presence was a comfort, a thin line of order against the potential chaos. But your little lane, your isolated farmhouse, that's a different story. You listen for the telltale scrape of a boot on cobblestone where no boot should be, the creak of a gate that you know you latched. The fear of intrusion is palpable. It's not just about losing your meager possessions. A few tools, some hoarded coins, perhaps a good cloak. It's the violation, the threat to your family's safety within your own home. Your medieval security system might consist of a dog that barks at shadows and hopefully actual threats, and maybe a hefty stick kept near the bed. Not exactly ADT. Is it more like aggressive dog tactics? And beyond these tangible threats, the mind does love to conjure, doesn't it? Superstitious fears bloom in the darkness like night flowers. The shadows in the corner of the room, cast by the dying embers of the fire. Remember how essential that fire is, even in its fading state. They twist and writhe into unsettling shapes. Every unexplained noise, every gust of wind that rattles the shutters, can be attributed to something otherworldly. Ghosts of ancestors, restless spirits, mischievous sprites, or perhaps something more malevolent, believed to roam freely when the sun is down. You might recall tales told by the fireside, stories of creatures that stalk the night, of enchantments and curses. It's your medieval equivalent of checking under the bed for monsters, except the monsters in the stories are a lot more inventive and frankly, have better backstories than the ones our kids dream up. These fears are potent, especially when you're alone with your thoughts in the deep quiet. Historians still argue whether the perceived increase in crime and malevolent supernatural activity at night was a statistical reality, or more a reflection of heightened societal anxiety about the hours of darkness, amplified by folklore and the very real vulnerability. Unwinding. This is where that period of wakefulness, your dorveille and temps, transitions from a simple break in sleep to something much more practical, a time for vigilance. You're not just lying there, passively waiting for the next wave of sleep. You're on alert, a silent guardian of your household. You might strain your ears, trying to parse the normal night sounds, the sigh of the wind, the distant braying of a donkey, the snores of your family, from anything that signifies a threat. Is that a floorboard creaking under an unfamiliar weight, or just the old house settling, as it always does? Your senses become sharper. The smell of smoke, is it from your own hearth, dying down safely? Or is it the acrid scent of something burning that shouldn't be? Fire, as we know, is a constant companion and a constant threat. A stray spark, an unattended ember, could spell disaster. So, during this wakeful period, you might quietly rise, your bare feet cold on the earthen or wooden floor. You check the hearth, ensuring the embers are contained, perhaps nudging a log back into place. You test the door bar, make sure the shutters are secure against both the chill night air and any unwelcome entry. It's a quiet, almost ritualistic patrol of your small domain. You listen to the breathing of your children, if you have them, tucked in nearby. Are they peaceful? Is anyone stirring with a cough or a fever? This is a time to check on the vulnerable. If you have livestock sheltered close by, perhaps in an attached byre, or even in the same building as was common in some longhouses, you'd be attuned to their sounds too. An agitated animal could be a sign of an approaching predator, animal or human. A quirky, lesser-known tidbit is the variety of specific saints people might mentally invoke for protection during these watchful hours. Saint Giles, for instance, was sometimes called upon for protection against night terrors or sudden panic, a sort of spiritual security blanket against the unseen. You might murmur a quiet prayer for safety, a common practice to bolster courage and seek divine protection against these very real and imagined dangers. This isn't anxious, jittery paranoia. Not usually. It's a calm, practiced awareness, a responsibility. The medieval night, you see, isn't just a void to be slept through. It's an active part of life, and this period of wakefulness provides a natural, almost scheduled opportunity to ensure the continued safety and well-being of your household until the reassuring light of dawn. It's like your own internal night watch, a biological imperative mixed with a learned caution. Instead of doom-scrolling on a glowing rectangle, you're scanning your immediate, much more tangible world for actual, non-digital threats. And honestly, between a Twitter argument and a potential wolf, I think I know which one I'd rather deal with. Well, maybe. The wolf is probably less opinionated. This vigilance, this quiet stewardship of the night, is just another layer of the intricate tapestry of medieval life. Woven into the very rhythm of your segmented sleep, you're not just passing time, you're holding the line until the sun rises again. Okay, the sun has well and truly set on our medieval day, hasn't it? Remember how the evening chill started to creep in, even before the last sliver of orange disappeared below the horizon? Now, you find yourself plunged into a world that modern minds can barely comprehend. A world ruled by the encroaching and often absolute darkness. Tonight, we're delving into the very real, very tangible tyranny of light, or more accurately, the profound lack of it. You might think, oh, it's dark, I'll just flip a switch. A charmingly 21st century notion. But here, in this time, light isn't a utility, it's a luxury, a fleeting resource, and its scarcity dictates the very pulse of your existence. Forget your all-night Netflix binges or scrolling endlessly through social media. When the sun goes down, the world, for most people, effectively shuts down too. It's less lights out and more lights out of reach. Your first and freest source of nighttime illumination is, of course, the moon. On a clear night, a full moon can be surprisingly bright, casting silvery ethereal shadows, turning familiar landscapes into something otherworldly. You might find yourself navigating by its glow, a soft, cool radiance that guides your steps if you absolutely must be out. But the moon, bless its celestial heart, is a fickle friend. It waxes and wanes, hides behind clouds, and for a good portion of the month, offers very little assistance at all. Relying on moonlight is like relying on a celebrity to tweet sense, occasionally brilliant, mostly disappointing. So, what about artificial light? Well, this is where things get fragrant. Your most common, everyday option, if you're not particularly well off, is the humble rushlight. Now, these aren't your fancy scented candles. Oh no. Imagine taking the pith, the soft, spongy core of a rush plant, carefully peeling it to leave a little strip of skin for support, then drying it and dipping it in leftover animal fat, bacon grease, mutton fat, whatever was on hand. That's your rush light. It's a very DIY affair, and the resulting light is, well, it's there. Barely dumbing, you'd hold this skinny, greasy taper, and it would sputter and smoke, casting a dim, yellowish flickering glow that barely pushes back the oppressive darkness. The light from a single rush light might only illuminate a tiny circle, perhaps a couple of feet around you, enough to see the page of a precious book if you squint, or to avoid tripping over the sleeping dog, but not much more. And the smell a constant, lingering aroma of hot, sometimes rancid, fat. It's the kind of scent that really sticks with you, and not in a good potpourri kind of way. A single rush light might only burn for, say, 15 to 30 minutes, maybe an hour if you're lucky, and it's a particularly well-made one. This, by the way, is our quirky tidbit. For the section, the sheer effort of constantly making and replacing these short-lived, smoky light sources. People would often have several prepared, ready to go, just to get through a few hours of dim illumination. It's a bit like trying to read by the light of a single, very sad birthday candle. Now, if you have a bit more coin, or if it's a special occasion, you might graduate to candles. But even these are a world away from our modern paraffin or soy wax creations. The standard candle for most folks would be made of tallow, rendered animal fat again, usually beef or mutton. Tallow candles burned longer and a bit brighter than rush lights, but they came with their own set of characteristics. They smoked, they guttered, they dripped profusely, and they smelled, well, like burning animal fat. It's said you could often tell what someone had for dinner by the smell of their candles later. A rather unfortunate form of atmospheric, what I eat in a day. The true luxury, the Rolls-Royce of medieval lighting, was the beeswax candle. Ah, beeswax. These burned cleanly, with a sweet, subtle honey scent, and gave off a much brighter, steadier, more pleasant light. But beeswax was expensive, seriously expensive, the kind of thing reserved for churches, monasteries, and the very wealthy. Having a room lit by multiple beeswax candles was a significant display of status. It was the medieval equivalent of having a giant flat-screen TV in every room. This is our fun mainstream historical fact. The clear distinction in cost and quality between tallow for the masses and beeswax for the elite. For most people, a beeswax candle was an aspirational item, rarely encountered. So, you have these limited, often smelly and dim sources of light. How does this dictate your life? Profoundly, your working day is almost entirely governed by sunlight. Farmers, artisans, laborers, you rise with the sun, or even before it, to maximize those precious daylight hours. Once dusk settles, productive work for most people grinds to a halt. Trying to do intricate work, like sewing or writing, by the feeble glow of a rushlight or a single tallow candle, was incredibly difficult, eye-straining, and often just not worth the cost of the light itself. It's no wonder people developed such an intimate relationship with the dawn. It wasn't just a new day. It was the return of their ability to do things. This scarcity of light naturally led to the early to bed, early to rise lifestyle we often associate with the past. It wasn't just a quaint saying, it was a practical necessity. Why stay up late, burning precious fuel, when you could be resting, conserving energy for the daylight hours when real work could be done? Socializing, too, was often curtailed by the darkness. While people certainly gathered, especially around the communal hearth, which provided both warmth and some light. Extensive nighttime revelries were more challenging and less common than they are today. The night was a time for rest, for quiet, or for those things that thrive in darkness, some less savory than others, as we've touched upon before. This leads to interesting patterns of sleep. You might not just go to bed and sleep straight through for 8 hours. Many people experienced what's known as segmented sleep, or first and second sleep. You'd go to bed not long after dark, sleep for a few hours, then wake up for an hour or two in the middle of the night. During this waking period, you might pray, meditate, check on the livestock, have a quiet chat with your spouse, or even get up and do some light chores if there was enough moonlight or a banked fire. Then, you'd go back to sleep for a second period until dawn. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of segmented sleep was primarily due to lighting conditions making sustained activity at night difficult, or if other sociocultural factors played a more significant role. But it's fascinating to think that our solid 8-hour block of sleep is a relatively modern construct, perhaps influenced by the advent of cheap, reliable artificial light. Being awake and active for long periods after dark was simply impractical and expensive, unless you had a very good reason. The town watch, for instance, had to be out, had to have light. They would carry lanterns, carefully shielded against the wind, their flickering lights a small comfort in the vast inky blackness. But for the average person, wandering around in the dark was dangerous and generally avoided. You couldn't see where you were going. You couldn't see who else was out there. And every lit candle or rushlight was a tiny drain on your resources. It's hard to have bright ideas when your main light source is as dim as a politician's promise. Think about it, your entire rhythm, your productivity, your social life, even your sleep, all held captive by the availability of a few sputtering flames. It's a tyranny, not of a cruel king, but of physics and economics. The cost of light, the inefficiency of it, shaped society in fundamental ways. We, with our brightly lit cities that never truly sleep, our homes ablaze with light at the flick of countless switches, have largely forgotten this fundamental constraint. We've conquered the night, or at least, we think we have. But back then, the night was a vast, dark ocean, and you were just a tiny boat with a very small lamp, hoping to make it to morning. It really puts a new perspective on being in the dark about something, doesn't it? They were quite literally in the dark about a great many things, especially after sunset. The idea of pulling an all-nighter to study would have been utterly laughable, or seen as an act of extravagant, almost decadent wastefulness. Unless, of course, you were a monk meticulously copying a manuscript by the light of a single precious beeswax candle, in which case your dedication was truly illuminating. And so, as the last rushlight flickers and dies, or the tallow candle burns down to a sputtering wick, you're left with the profound, enveloping darkness. It's a darkness filled with unseen things, with the rustles and creaks of the old house, with the distant howl of a dog, and with the quiet knowledge that until the sun graces the sky again, the world outside your small, fragile bubble of awareness is largely unknowable and untamed. The lack of light wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a fundamental shaper of human experience. The last vestiges of that, vigilance, from your watch period begin to melt away, like frost in the morning sun. Though, let's be honest, morning sun is still a good while off, so don't get too excited. You hear the soft, almost imperceptible thunk as the last person on duty perhaps sets down a log by the hearth. Or maybe it's just the house settling around you, breathing its own quiet sighs. The small sounds of activity, those little affirmations that someone was awake and aware, fade into a deeper, more profound stillness. And just like that, the sleepiness, which you'd politely ask to wait in the lobby during your dorveille, your waking interlude, now strolls back in, looking rather pleased with itself. It's a different kind of tired from the one that dragged you to bed for your first sleep. This isn't the heavy end of a long day exhaustion. No, this is a softer, more insidious drowsiness, a gentle invitation. Your eyelids, which had been cooperating so nicely, suddenly feel like they're lined with lead, or perhaps very, very comfortable tiny sandbags. Yes, luxury sandbags, the kind they only issue in really good dreams. A yawn, a truly magnificent, jaw-cracking, eye-watering cavern of a yawn, escapes you. It's not one of those polite, stifled, "Oh, excuse me," yawns you might deploy in a dull meeting. This is a full-bodied, soul-deep declaration that, yes, you are quite ready to return to the land of Nod. You can almost feel your brain cells giving a tiny collective sigh of relief. Finally, they seem to whisper amongst themselves. They're getting the hint. Took them long enough. Remember that fire we talked about? The one that was crackling so merrily, or perhaps just dutifully smoldering a little while ago when you were up and about. It's now a gentle blush of embers, a soft, pulsating heart in the deepening darkness of your room. The light it casts is minimal, transforming the deepest shadows into merely very, very dark gray areas. It's a warm, rosy glow that doesn't demand your attention, merely offers a comforting, almost primal presence. And with the fire's slow retreat, you feel the ambient temperature dip just a little more. That subtle chill in the air, the kind that makes you want to burrow, renders the thought of your bed, your nest, a truly 5-star, Michelin-rated destination for the weary soul. You reach out, perhaps a little blindly, a little dreamily, for your bedding. Is it that bundle of straw we imagined earlier, which, by now, has probably conformed itself perfectly to the unique contours of your very important medieval physique? Or the furs, still holding a faint, comforting scent of woodsmoke, maybe a hint of lanolin, and, well, authentically, you. You give it a little pat, 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 a gentle fluffing where fluffing is possible, a minor adjustment of whatever serves as your pillow. Maybe it's that bundled up cloak, or if you're living large, an actual pillow stuffed with feathers that probably made a dramatic, last-minute escape from a very surprised goose. This is your pre-sleep ritual, the ancient human equivalent of a cat circling precisely 3.5 times before deeming a spot worthy. It's important. It signals intent. It tells the universe, shh, I'm about to be brilliant at sleeping. Around you, the soundscape is one of communal surrender, a symphony of sleepy sounds. The soft rustle of fabric as someone else in the household turns over, seeking their own perfect angle of repose. A gentle, almost apologetic sniffle from across the room. The rhythmic, reassuring creak of bed drops, the original white noise machine, if you really think about it, far superior to any app. These sounds aren't disruptive. They're companionable. A subtle, auditory blanket woven from the shared experience of easing back into the quiet embrace of the night. Everyone is succumbing. Everyone is part of this collective drift. There's a profound sense of permission now, isn't there? The little tasks you might have undertaken during your waking period, perhaps mending that rather unfortunate tear in your tunic by the dim firelight, quietly discussing tomorrow's vital turnip-related strategies, or, let's be perfectly honest, sneaking a second, slightly chilled helping of yesterday's stew when you thought no one was looking. All that is done. The mental checklist, if you even had one, is clear. The night, in its infinite wisdom and rather sensible segmentation, has allocated this next precious portion, purely unequivocally for rest. No guilt, no lingering shoulds. Just sleep. You pull the covers up. Maybe it's a thick, slightly scratchy woolen blanket, woven with who knows what kind of rough, homespun charm. Or perhaps it's a heavy animal hide. Its substantial weight a comforting pressure, like a prehistoric version of a modern weighted blanket, designed by nature to soothe anxious cave people. This pressure, this gentle, insistent weight, coaxes your muscles to release any lingering tension they might have been stubbornly clinging to. Your shoulders drop a fraction further. Your jaw, which might have been unconsciously clenched, unclenches. Your very bones seem to settle deeper into your mattress, finding their final, perfect resting place for the night. Your thoughts, which might have been a bit more focused, a bit more pointy and problem-solving during your waking interlude, now begin to soften, to blur beautifully at the edges. They drift lazily, like dandelion seeds on the gentlest of summer breezes, or perhaps like particularly unmotivated clouds. No longer are you trying to hold on to them, to analyze them. You just observe them float by, becoming less distinct, more abstract, more, well, sleepy. The darkness itself feels different too. It's not the sharp, alert darkness of the watch, where every elongated shadow might have held a rustle, a creak, or a poorly timed spider. No, this is a soft, welcoming, velvety blackness, wrapping around you like the gentlest, warmest, most understanding of cocoons. And as you lie there, poised on the very delicious cusp of unconsciousness, there's this quiet, and almost smug satisfaction bubbling up. Isn't there you've successfully navigated the first sleep? You've had your little intermission of wakefulness, your dorveille, and now you're embarking on the grand, eagerly anticipated second act, the glorious second sleep. It feels complete, utterly natural, like you're finally using the sleep instruction manual that humanity somehow misplaced around the time the first light bulb flickered to life and everyone decided staying up late was a brilliant idea. This second sleep, often lauded in historical accounts and personal diaries as being particularly deep, dream-rich, and wonderfully restorative. Stretches before you like a calm, dark, inviting sea. It promises to carry you effortlessly, without any annoying interruptions, until the first, faint, almost shy whispers of dawn begin to paint the eastern sky. This is the main event, the deep dive, the part of the night where the real magic of rest happens. And it's not just folk wisdom passed down through generations of sleepyheads. Modern science has peered into this, with some studies suggesting our brains have a natural dip in alertness midway through a long night, hinting that this biphasic pattern might be more aligned with our internal clocks than our brightly lit 24/7 world tends to encourage. So, our ancestors weren't just trying to find a socially acceptable excuse for a midnight snack and a bit of a ponder, though I wouldn't entirely put it past them. You feel a profound sense of restfulness already beginning to steep into your very being, even before you're fully submerged in sleep's embrace. It's the quiet confidence, the cellular knowledge, that this period of unconsciousness will truly reset you, will mend the frayed edges of the day, and prepare you for whatever wonders or mild inconveniences the new dawn brings. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of biphasic sleep was primarily a practical response to the limitations of pre-industrial lighting. You know, it gets dark, you sleep, you wake up for a bit because, well, it's still profoundly dark. And what else are you going to do? Invent Netflix? Or if it fulfilled deeper psychological, social, or even spiritual needs within those communities? Perhaps it was a beautiful, practical bit of both, a rhythm born of necessity and then lovingly woven into the very fabric of daily and nightly life. Now, for a little quirky tidbit. From the dusty annals of sleepy history, some medieval medical texts actually offered quite specific advice on how to spend that waking interval. The dorveille, based on your dominant humor, that old fascinating concept of bodily fluids influencing your temperament and health. So, if you were of a melancholic disposition, prone to a bit of medieval gloom and existential angst, perhaps some quiet prayer or deep, soulful contemplation was recommended by your learned physician. If you were more sanguine, naturally cheerful and optimistic, maybe a bit of light, improving reading was prescribed, assuming, of course, you were part of the literate elite and could afford the scandalous luxury of candlelight. Thankfully, no recommendations for doom scrolling through heavily illuminated manuscripts depicting the apocalypse. They were spared that particular modern joy. And for our mainstream historical factoment, tonight, Charles Dickens, that incomparable chronicler of 19th century English life, frequently referenced the first sleep and tender second sleep in his novels as if it were the most normal thing in the world, because, for many, it still was. Characters in novels like Key Barnaby Rudge speak of it as a perfectly ordinary part of the nightly schedule. This just shows how ingrained this pattern of segmented sleep was, lingering stubbornly, even as gaslight and, eventually, the relentless glow of electric light began to fundamentally reshape humanity's nocturnal habits. It wasn't just some ancient, forgotten practice. It was the lived reality, the common rhythm of the night. For a very, very long time, there's no frantic scramble to fall asleep right now, no pressure from an impending alarm. You just lie there, cocooned in the comforting darkness, the residual warmth, and the profound quiet, allowing the remnants of the day, and indeed the first part of the night, to settle and dissipate like mist. It's a gentle, unhurried drift, a stark and rather enviable contrast to our modern, often desperate, plunge into unconsciousness, racing against the tyranny of the digital clock face. This is your body and your mind, joyfully surrendering to a rhythm that's ancient, innate, deeply human. As you sink further, deeper, there's an undeniable feeling of rightness, amazadati, of completing a natural essential cycle. It's the feeling of your entire being aligning with a pattern that generations upon generations before you knew intimately. A pattern written into our very DNA. Your breathing deepens, becoming slow, even and regular as a tide. Your limbs, already heavy and relaxed, now feel anchored, pleasantly so, to the comforting support beneath you. The last coherent thought might be a fleeting, half-forgotten image from a dream you had in your first sleep, or perhaps just the silent, grateful acknowledgement of the profound peace of this moment. And then, a soft, gentle fade to black, not an abrupt switching off of a light, but a slow, graceful dimming as the profound, restorative, and utterly welcoming embrace of the second sleep enfolds you, promising to carry you, with effortless grace and quiet serenity, all the way to the dawn. So, you drift further into this understanding, this old way of sleeping, and perhaps a little voice in your head, the one that's still clinging to our modern, one block of sleep ideal, is asking, okay, interesting theory, but where's the actual proof? It's a fair question. After all, we're talking about a fundamental shift in how people experienced nearly a third of their lives. And if it was so widespread, like we mentioned earlier with those pre-industrial nights, surely it left a mark. And it did. You just have to know where to look and how to listen to those whispers from the past. The evidence isn't conveniently packaged in a history book titled Everything You Wanted to Know About First and Second Sleep, but we're too continuously asleep to ask. No, it's scattered, woven into the very fabric of life from centuries ago. You start by unfurling the brittle pages of old wee diaries. Imagine you're peering over the shoulder of someone from, say, the 17th century. Their handwriting, a spidery script, dances across the page under the flickering light of a tallow candle. You can almost smell the old paper, a bit dusty, a bit sweet. And there, amongst notes about the price of wool or a spat with a neighbor, you find it, an entry like, woke after my first sleep, the moon full in the window, mended the torn shirt by the hearth, then to prayers, and so to my second sleep. It's not presented as anything unusual. It's just what happened. Samuel Pepys, the famous English diarist, he's a good source for this kind of everyday detail. His writings offer glimpses into the nightly routines that included these wakeful periods, though you often have to read between the lines. These aren't dramatic confessions of insomnia. They're matter-of-fact accounts. You see them describing getting up, maybe having a quiet chat with their spouse, pondering the universe, or, let's be honest, probably worrying about things, just like we do when we wake up at 3 a.m. Except instead of doom scrolling, they might have actually, done something, a revolutionary concept. Then, you turn your attention to medical texts of the era. These aren't just dusty old books full of questionable remedies involving leeches, though. Okay, there's a fair bit of that too. Doctors and physicians of the 15th, 16th, 17th centuries regularly referred to first sleep and second sleep as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Because for them, it was, you'll find advice, often quite specific, on what to do during that wakeful interlude. Some physicians recommended light study, quiet contemplation, or even specific postures. A mainstream historical fact here is that many medical practitioners of the time believed this period between sleeps was particularly potent for conception, offering advice to couples on how to best utilize it. Talk about family planning, pre-industrial style. And a quirky, lesser-known tidbit, some texts even suggested that the quality of your thoughts during this wakeful period could influence the rest of your night's sleep and even your health the next day. A sort of early cognitive behavioral therapy. If you squint really hard and ignore the part about balancing your humors. They weren't just observing a habit, they were actively incorporating it into their understanding of health and well-being. No one was pathologizing waking up in the middle of the night. They were prescribing activities for it. Next, you dive into the world of literature. Think of the stories, poems, and plays from before the Industrial Revolution. Authors, those keen observers of human nature, pepper their works with references to this pattern. You might find a character in a Chaucerian tale mentioning rising after their first sleep, or perhaps in a lesser-known Renaissance play. A scene unfolds where characters converse in the quiet stillness of this midnight hour. The world outside their shuttered windows dark and silent, save for the watchman's call we talked about. It's often subtle, not a plot point in itself, but a reflection of accepted daily rhythm. For instance, in Don Quixote, Cervantes casually mentions characters waking after a first sleep. These literary nods are powerful because they normalize the experience. If it's in the stories people tell and consume, it's part of their shared reality. It wasn't a literary device for, ooh, spooky night scene. It was just Tuesday night, finally. And perhaps most compellingly for some, you unearth court records. Dusty ribbon-bound documents detailing disputes, crimes, and witness testimonies. And here, in the stark, unvarnished language of legal proceedings, segmented sleep appears as an alibi, a time marker, a simple fact of life. Imagine a witness statement. I heard the commotion, Your Honor, after my first sleep, as I was tending to the fire, sometime past midnight. Or a defendant claiming, I was abed in my second sleep when the alleged incident occurred. These aren't people trying to sound poetic or philosophical. They're stating facts under oath, in situations where accuracy about time and activity could mean the difference between freedom and punishment. Court records provide a gritty real-world context. For example, records from places like Paris or London in the 17th century might detail crimes committed or discovered during this liminal period. Someone might confess to sneaking out of their master's house between the two sleeps. This is where you encounter a fascinating point of discussion, as historians still argue whether the wakeful period between sleeps was universally seen as productive and peaceful, or if, for many, especially the less fortunate, it was a time of heightened anxiety and vulnerability, particularly given the profound darkness and often limited security of the pre-industrial world we've touched upon. One can imagine that for some, this waking period wasn't for serene prayer, but for anxiously listening for any unfamiliar sound outside a flimsy door. It adds a layer of complexity, doesn't it? It wasn't all just quiet contemplation and mending shirts by a cozy fire for everyone. So, you see, the evidence isn't a single glaring spotlight. It's more like finding countless, scattered candle flames in the vast darkness of the past, in personal diaries, in learned medical advice, in the pages of beloved literature, and in the stark realities of court testimonies. Each flame, a small flicker on its own, but together, they illuminate a forgotten landscape of sleep, a world where the night was divided, and life, in its quiet, middle-of-the-night way, went on. It's almost enough to make you want to try it, though maybe without the threat of being accused of witchcraft if you're up too late. Progress. Honey? So, while we've been drifting through this rather cozy idea of a universal first sleep and second sleep, you can probably guess it wasn't quite a one-size-fits-all pajama party across the medieval and early modern world. Just like today, where your city apartment dweller has a vastly different soundscape to their night than someone in a remote cabin. How people experienced segmented sleep likely rippled and changed with the very ground beneath their feet and the air they breathed. Imagine, for a moment, you're nestled in a stone cottage on a windswept, craggy coastline in, say, Brittany or Scotland. The nights are long, especially in winter, and the wind howls like a banshee with a stubbed toe. Your first sleep might be a deep dive into warmth, huddled with family, the fire banked low, the dorveille, that quiet, wakeful period we've talked so much about, might be less about philosophical musings and more about a pragmatic need to check the storm shutters, add a log to the fire, or perhaps listen for the sounds of the sea, judging the tides if your livelihood depends on it. Contrast this with someone living in a sun-baked Mediterranean villa. The evenings are long and warm, perhaps even uncomfortably so. Your first sleep might be lighter, almost a surrender to the eventual cooling of the night. The dorveille. Here could be a welcome, cooler interlude, a time to sit by an open window, feel the night breeze, maybe even fetch a cool drink of water before drifting into a second sleep as dawn approaches. The very length of daylight and the intensity of the climate would shape these rhythms. In those long, dark Scandinavian winters, for example, the period available for sleep, and thus for segmentation, was immense, almost inviting a more leisurely approach to the night's quiet hours. This is a far cry from equatorial regions, where the roughly 12-hour night remained consistent year-round, potentially leading to a more rigidly structured, or perhaps less pronounced, segmentation. Then, of course, you have the great divider's social standing. It's no surprise that a farmer's night looked very different from a nobleman's. Picture your average agricultural worker, someone whose life is tethered to the sun and seasons, much like we discussed with the natural rhythms influencing sleep. Their first sleep likely came early, after a day of hard physical labor. What did they do in their dorveille? Well, the truth is, this quiet interlude was probably still quite practical for them. You might wake to the sounds of the animals, a restless cow or a piglet in distress. Time to check on the livestock. Or perhaps it's a moment for quiet mending of tools or clothing by the faint embers of the fire. Tasks too fine for weary eyes at the end of a long day, but perfect for the stillness of the deep night. You can just imagine a medieval farmer waking up, not to check his phone notifications, but to check if the prize pig has somehow figured out how to open the gate again. Spoiler, it probably has. There's a quiet dignity in that, a connection to the essentials of life. Now, drift over to the manor house, or even a royal court. Here, you find the nobility. They have access to more expensive forms of artificial light, beeswax candles, oil lamps, than the tallow dips of the common folk. Their days might be filled with administration, hunting, or courtly intrigue, but perhaps not the same bone-deep weariness of a field hand. Their first sleep could be just as profound, but their dorveille. Ah, that's where things get interesting. For the literate, this was prime time for reading, for correspondence, for quiet study. Remember those intimate diary entries and letters we touched upon earlier? Many were penned in these stolen hours. For the devout, it was a period of intense prayer and contemplation, undisturbed by the day's clamor. And yes, for some, it was a time for, well, let's call them noble pursuits with their spouse, a level of privacy and leisure perhaps not afforded to those in more crowded, humbler dwellings. It's almost like their version of doom scrolling at 2 a.m., except instead of a glowing screen, it's an illuminated manuscript, and instead of existential dread about your feed, it's existential dread about the upcoming joust, or perhaps the state of their immortal soul. And what about the burgeoning towns and cities? Life here is a different beast altogether. You're no longer isolated. You hear your neighbors. There are watchmen calling the hours, The distant sounds of revelry? Or perhaps a late-night argument carrying on the breeze? Urban dwellers, from skilled artisans to humble laborers, had their own rhythms. An apprentice baker, for instance, had a truly unique schedule. The mainstream historical fact here is that bakers traditionally started their work exceptionally early, often well before dawn, to ensure fresh bread was available in the morning. So, did they have a very short first sleep, then work through the night and catch a second sleep in the afternoon? Or did their first sleep happen in the early evening, with the dorveille being a very brief interlude before the grueling work of kneading dough in the dark began? Their sleep was utterly dictated by their craft. Consider also the monks and nuns in their monasteries and convents. Their lives were meticulously structured around prayer, and this absolutely included the night. The rule of Saint Benedict, which dates all the way back to the 6th century, laid out specific times for liturgical prayer throughout the day and night, including matins and lauds, which took place in the very early morning hours. This essentially institutionalized segmented sleep for them. Their first sleep ended. They rose for prayer and spiritual readings, and then perhaps returned for a second sleep before the day's work began. It wasn't about personal preference. It was divine ordinance. And here's a quirky little tidbit. Think about the town criers or the night watch. These were professions that inherently shattered any neat first sleep, second sleep pattern. Their job was the night. They likely slept in shifts or during the daylight hours, their entire circadian rhythm an inversion of the norm, making them figures of the liminal spaces between dusk and dawn. Historians still argue whether the urban poor, crammed into noisy, often unsanitary tenements, even had the luxury of a distinct, peaceful dorveille. Perhaps for them, wakefulness in the night was less about quiet contemplation and more about the baby crying, the neighbors arguing, or the gnawing feeling of hunger. Their experience of the night, and any segmentation of sleep, would have been raw, immediate, and far removed from the gentle, reflective dorveille hang we often idealize. So, you're still there, aren't you? Perhaps lingering in that quiet, deeply personal hour between your first and second sleep, that serene, almost sacred interval we explored together a little while back. Remember that the soft shadows in the room, the hushed sounds from outside, the unique clarity of thought that often visited you in the stillness. It's a precious, liminal space. Isn't it? A little pocket of time just for you? Well, I want you to hold on to that sensation, that memory, almost like cupping a tiny purity, flickering flame in your hands, because you begin to feel a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the very air around you. There's a new hum, a faint vibration that wasn't there before, carried on the night breeze. It's the insistent, pervasive sound of change, and it's quietly, inexorably coming to tuck your beloved segmented sleep pattern into bed. And this time, it's for good. The long goodbye has begun. You see, the world beyond your cozy, perhaps still candlelit or oil lamp illuminated room, is, well, it's getting decidedly louder and much, much busier. That gentle, predictable rhythm of agrarian life, the one where your day was so beautifully dictated by the rise and fall of the sun, the turning of the seasons, the needs of the land, that rhythm is starting to falter, to be overshadowed. Instead, you hear it, first as a distant rumble, then a more insistent clang and churn, the sound of looms, of engines, of relentless machinery. This, my friend, is the unmistakable overture of the Industrial Revolution, a period that, as you know, famously and irrevocably transformed manufacturing, production, and yes, how every single person earned their daily bread. It was a revolution in every sense. Suddenly, your time, that precious commodity, isn't quite your own anymore, is it? the shrill, demanding shriek of the factory whistle, not the gentle crowing of the rooster or the first rays of dawn, becomes your new, non-negotiable alarm clock. And it's a rather abrupt, insistent, and frankly, quite unforgiving sort of alarm, caring little for whether your second sleep felt complete. And with these new, smoke-belching factories, you find yourself, along with countless thousands of others, drawn as if by an invisible current towards the rapidly expanding, often chaotic, towns and cities. Remember that sense of space you might have had, even in a modest rural dwelling? That's shrinking. Your little cottage with its comforting patch of land, its familiar nighttime quiet. It's increasingly likely to be exchanged for a shared room, perhaps a single cramped space in a crowded tenement building, where the sounds of your neighbors, their coughs, their arguments, their own restless sleep, are as constant and unavoidable as your own breath. Privacy, especially the kind of deep, undisturbed quiet needed for that reflective, midnight wakefulness we talked about, becomes an almost unimaginable luxury. And with more people pressed together, living cheek by jowl, social expectations begin to subtly, then overtly, shift too. Being up and about in the dead of night, that period previously filled with prayer, quiet work, or intimacy, starts to feel, well, a bit different. Less like a normal, accepted interlude and more, well, a tad suspicious perhaps. What are you doing? Wandering your small room or gazing out the window at 2 a.m. when all other honest, hardworking folk are, or at least are, supposed to be sound asleep, gathering strength for another grueling day at the mill or the mine? The night itself starts to feel less like a shared, quiet commons and more like a time for locked doors and anxious listening. Then, just as you're adjusting to these new rhythms of work and crowded city life, a new kind of glow begins to permeate the evening, painting the cobblestones and filtering through your window pane. It's not the soft, organic flicker of a tallow candle we discussed, nor the gentle, warm radiance of an oil lamp that cast such dancing shadows. No, this is something else entirely. It's brighter, more consistent, almost assertive. First, the main thoroughfares, the public squares, and then, slowly, more affluent homes begin to shimmer with the distinct, slightly yellow hue of gaslight. It's a remarkable innovation, isn't it? Suddenly, the night isn't quite so profoundly dark, not so impenetrable or final. The dominion of darkness is being challenged. You find you can read later into the evening. You can socialize for longer. Shops can stay open. And factories. Oh yes, factories can extend their hours. The traditional boundaries of the day are being actively pushed back, stretched taut. That natural ancient cue for your first sleep, the enveloping, velvety darkness, is now being directly challenged, even diluted, by this persistent, man-made twilight. It's almost as if the night itself is being politely, but firmly, told it's overstaying its welcome. And you know, it's a quirky little tidbit that some of the early adopters of gaslight in their homes were genuinely a bit wary. There were widespread concerns about the acrid fumes, the considerable heat it generated, even the sheer unnaturalness of having these pipes of flammable gas running through one's walls. Imagine trying to pitch that to a skeptical homeowner today. It's perfectly safe, mostly. Just try not to think about the open flame near the curtains. But gaslight, as truly revolutionary as it was in its time, was merely the opening act, the herald of an even more profound illumination. You then witnessed the arrival of the true showstopper, the technology that would irrevocably alter humanity's relationship with the night electric light. Try to imagine the sheer wonder, the almost disbelieving awe, of seeing an incandescent bulb flicker to life for the very first time. It's a clean, pure, incredibly bright, almost magical kind of illumination, free from soot and smell. And as the technology rapidly improves, as figures like Thomas Edison masterfully popularize and distribute it, electric light becomes steadily cheaper, significantly safer, and far more widespread than gas ever was. Edison's development and promotion of a commercially viable incandescent light bulb and accompanying electrical infrastructure in the late 19th century wasn't just another clever invention. It was, quite literally, a fundamental rewiring of human experience, of our circadian rhythms. Suddenly, you have the power to flood your entire home, your entire city block, with brilliant light at the mere flick of a switch. The night, for all intents and purposes, can be banished at will. Your brain, still beautifully wired for those ancient, primal cues of light and darkness that we've discussed, receives a very strong, very clear, and a very confusing signal. It's daytime, or at the very least, it could be, if you wanted it to be. The sun no longer holds a monopoly on brightness. So, with your days now rigidly dictated by demanding factory schedules, or office hours that require you to be alert, focused, and productive for one single, long, unbroken stretch, and your nights increasingly, brilliantly illuminated, that gentle bimodal rhythm of two sleeps starts to feel, well, deeply impractical, inefficient, even in this new, fast-paced world. That quiet, reflective hour or two you once cherished in the middle of the night. In this new calculus of productivity, it's increasingly viewed as lost time, potential output squandered, a kink in the otherwise smooth machinery of the modern worker. Why wake up, stir the fire, and then try to go back to sleep, when you could just sleep through, consolidate it all into one convenient, uninterrupted block? Get your prescribed 8 hours, or, more realistically for many caught in the grind, far, far fewer, and be done with it. Ready to face the relentless demands of the new day. The pressure, both economic and social, to adopt this new streamlined monophasic pattern is truly immense. It's as if an invisible memo has circulated, declaring that segmented sleep was hopelessly old-fashioned, a relic of a bygone era, and you certainly wouldn't want to be caught dead or, well, conspicuously awake. In the middle of the night, it's the great sleep consolidation. It almost sounds like a rather dull corporate merger, doesn't it? Segmented Sleep Inc. regretfully announces its acquisition by Monophasic Core. And here, the experts still ponder the precise chain of cause and effect. Historians still argue whether the decisive shift to monophasic sleep was primarily driven by the relentless, time-is-money demands of industrial capitalism, with its unceasing focus on maximizing labor and standardizing the workday, or if the revolutionary advent of cheap, powerful, and readily available artificial light was the more significant factor in fundamentally repatterning our nights. Of course, it's most likely a complex interplay, a self-reinforcing feedback loop. New, rigid working patterns created a societal demand for more usable evening hours for leisure or further work, and the dazzling new lighting technologies both enabled and profoundly reinforced those emerging patterns, making the single, consolidated sleep feel not just possible, but natural. One of those quirky, lesser-known details from the era is how some of the very first public spaces to be illuminated by electricity, a park, a prominent street, a grand exhibition hall, were initially met with a kind of collective, breathless awe, almost like witnessing a nightly theatrical spectacle or a divine miracle. People would reportedly gather in crowds just to see the lights, to bask in their novel glow. It really underscored the profound novelty. This astonishing human conquest of primordial darkness. And this ties directly back to that mainstream historical fact. We all learn the Industrial Revolution didn't just change what people did for work or where they lived. It fundamentally altered when and how they lived, right down to their most private unconscious hours of rest. The very concept of bedtime transforms, becoming more rigid, less fluid, a single appointment with oblivion rather than a two-part journey. And so, as you lie there, you feel that ancient pattern, the one your ancestors knew and lived by for untold millennia, the one that saw the night as a different country with its own unique customs, slipping away like sand through your fingers. This long goodbye to segmented sleep isn't a sudden, dramatic severance, no abrupt amputation. Instead, it's a slow, almost melancholic fade, like a beloved, familiar candle gradually burning down, its gentle light dimming, only to be ultimately replaced by something far, far brighter and infinitely more demanding of your wakefulness. The monophasic model begins its inexorable rise, championed by doctors, employers, and social commentators as the normal, the healthy, the efficient way to sleep. It's a profound, society-wide transformation, one that completely reshapes our communal understanding of night and rest, setting the stage for how we, even now, in our brightly lit, 24/7 world, think about and often struggle with our nightly repose. You almost feel a little pang of sadness, don't you? A sense of loss, like waving goodbye to an old, comforting friend you didn't fully appreciate until they were gone. Perhaps that's why some of us, even today, still find ourselves inexplicably wide awake at 3 in the morning, staring at the darkened ceiling, feeling a faint, restless echo of that lost middle-of-the-night world, a whisper from our ancestral past. It's as if our brains are still half expecting a second act, an intermission that modern life, in its infinite wisdom and pursuit of efficiency, has unceremoniously canceled. Sorry, folks, a booming voice seems to announce. Due to overwhelming popular demand for relentless productivity, the traditional nighttime intermission has been permanently cut. Please remain in your seats, or rather your beds, until morning. So, here you are, back in the present day, or perhaps it's the wee hours of the morning, and you've found yourself staring at the ceiling, wondering if this restlessness is a modern affliction, or something older. Do any echoes of that segmented sleep, that dorveille we explored, still ripple through our brightly lit, hyper-connected nights? You might be surprised. Think about those times you wake up, not in a panic, but just awake. It's 3 a.m. The world outside is hushed, save for the distant hum of a city that never quite sleeps, or maybe the sigh of the wind if you're lucky enough to escape the urban glow. For a moment, or an hour, your mind feels strangely clear, doesn't it? Before the anxiety about now not sleeping kicks in. That is, could this be a faint whisper from your ancestors, a biological memory of when this waking period was normal, even productive? Many sleep scientists now ponder this very question. What we pathologize as middle-of-the-night insomnia might, for some, be the ghost of a first sleep ending, yearning for that quiet, contemplative interlude we talked about earlier. Of course, telling your boss you were just honoring your historical sleep rhythms when you're late for work, well, that might not fly. Our modern sleep landscape is, let's be honest, a bit of a mess. We chase the dream of 8 solid, uninterrupted hours, that elusive, mythical creature, like a unicorn that also does your taxes. The pressure is immense. You scroll through articles, 10 tips for perfect sleep. Well, are you getting enough deep sleep? And all it does is make you more anxious about, well, sleeping. We're armed with sleep trackers, white noise machines, blackout curtains, and an endless pharmacopoeia of sleep aids. Yet so many of us struggle. It's a strange paradox. The more we know about sleep, the more elusive it can become. The glow of your phone screen, that little portal to endless information and distraction, is a notorious culprit, isn't it? That cool blue light, so good for daytime alertness, becomes a tiny saboteur in the quiet of your bedroom, tricking your brain into thinking the sun is just peeking over the horizon. The shift towards our current consolidated sleep ideal really solidified during the Industrial Revolution. That's a mainstream historical understanding. Factories needed workers to show up at the same time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, or at least present. Time became regimented, clocked in and out, and sleep had to fit neatly into the non-working hours, preferably in one convenient block. Before then, as we've seen, things were a lot more fluid. There's a delicious irony in thinking that our ancestors, without all our fancy sleep tech, might have had a more natural and less stressed relationship with their nightly rest. And what about napping? Oh, the glorious nap, that little slice of borrowed time, or, as my cat calls it, Tuesday. In many cultures, of course, the siesta is a hallowed tradition, a sensible pause in the heat of the day. But in our productivity-obsessed world, napping can sometimes be seen as a sign of laziness, or an admission that you didn't manage your night properly. Yet, there's a growing appreciation for the power nap, that short burst of sleep designed to refresh and refocus. Could these short daytime sleeps be a distant cousin to the second sleep? A way our bodies try to reclaim a bit of that biphasic pattern when the main sleep gets fractured or feels insufficient. Some find a 20-minute nap rejuvenates them, while others wake up feeling like they've been hit by a tranquilizer dart, wielded by a very confused sloth. It's personal, isn't it? It's fascinating to see how modern sleep science is increasingly looking back, peering into those historical sleep patterns for context, much like we're doing here. Remember Roger Ekirch, the historian whose work really brought segmented sleep into the modern consciousness? His research, and that of others, has prompted some sleep scientists to question the monolithic ideal of 8 continuous hours. There have even been experiments, like those studies where people are placed in environments with long periods of darkness, mimicking pre-industrial conditions. And guess what? Many participants naturally fell into a segmented sleep pattern. A first sleep, a period of wakefulness, and then a second sleep. It's almost as if, when you strip away the artificial light and the societal schedules, our bodies remember an older rhythm. Here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Some research on long-haul shift workers, or even astronauts on missions with disrupted day-night cycles, has shown that when they have extended downtime, a few of them spontaneously revert to a sleep pattern that looks remarkably like segmented sleep. It's as if, freed from the relentless tick-tock of the 24-hour workday, their internal clocks go, "Ah, this is how we used to do it." It makes you wonder what your own natural sleep pattern would be if you could just unplug from everything for a month. Terrifying thought, perhaps for some of us tethered to our devices. Of course, not all modern sleep disturbances are a gentle call from our ancestors. Stress, anxiety, medical conditions, these are very real modern-day thieves of rest. The endless barrage of information, the pressure to always be on, the blurring lines between work and home life, especially now, it all takes a toll. But understanding that our current sleep ideal is relatively recent, historically speaking, can be strangely comforting. It suggests that if you wake in the night, you're not necessarily broken. Your body might just be humming an old tune. The scholarly debate continues, as these things always do. Historians still argue whether the widespread adoption of artificial lighting truly killed first sleep, or if societal pressures, like the demands of industrial capitalism, were the more dominant executioner. Perhaps it was a tag team effort, a 1-2 punch that knocked out our collective dorveille. So, as you lie there, perhaps listening to the gentle whir of a fan, or the distant sounds of the world continuing without you for a few hours, consider these echoes. Are you simply a bad sleeper? Or are you experiencing a faint, vestigial pull towards a pattern of rest that served humanity for millennia? It's a thought to drift on, isn't it? Maybe that brief awakening isn't a failure, but an invitation. An invitation your modern brain, conditioned for efficiency, just doesn't quite know how to accept anymore. Or maybe you just drank too much coffee before bed. It's usually the coffee, isn't it? Just kidding. Mostly. But the possibility remains. A soft, intriguing whisper in the stillness of the night. And so, here we are, at the quiet end of our long night's journey together, the digital embers of our shared exploration glowing softly. You've walked through the medieval dusk, navigated by starlight and the flicker of distant hearths, and now you stand at the threshold of understanding a profoundly different way to sleep, a rhythm that once governed countless lives. You've seen, haven't you? How our ancestors didn't just collapse into bed, praying for 8 solid, uninterrupted hours of oblivion like we often do. Their nights were, in a way, more textured. That first sleep, often called first slumber, would pull them down into its deep, restorative embrace for a few hours. But then, almost like a natural intermission, they would drift back to a state of quiet wakefulness. This was the watching period, the dorveille, as the French called it, that curious, sometimes even magical interlude we've touched upon before. It wasn't an anxious, tossing and turning insomnia. It was an expected pause, a calm haven in the heart of the night. Before a second, often lighter, sleep carried them gently towards the dawn. This wasn't a broken pattern, a sign of a troubled mind, or too much spicy food before bed. It was the pattern, as natural to them as the crowing of the rooster we imagined startling the pre-dawn quiet, woven into the very fabric of their nights. This 2-act drama of sleep wasn't just tolerated, it was integrated, utilized. Remember those whispered conversations by the dying embers of the communal fire, or the solitary glow of a rushlight in a quiet study. This was the time for them. The dorveille was a space for quiet productivity, perhaps mending clothes, adding a few lines to a letter, or, like we pondered, simply stirring the pot of a slow-cooking pottage. It was a time for prayer, for spiritual contemplation, a moment to connect with the divine in the profound stillness, far from the day's clamor. For couples, it was often a time for intimacy, unhurried and relaxed after the initial fatigue of the day had passed. Or, as we've mused, sometimes it was just for gazing into the fire, listening to the wind, feeling the presence of others in the shared bed nearby. A stark contrast to our often solitary sleeping arrangements. There were no urgent notifications pinging, no glaring screens demanding attention, just the soft, organic light of the hearth or a candle. The distant sounds of the night watchman we pictured making his rounds, or the rustle of straw in the mattress. It was living time, not dead time. A calm personal space carved out of the vast darkness before the second sleep gently reclaimed them. Then, as the gears of the Industrial Revolution began to grind and the insistent glow of gaslight, followed by the even more pervasive electric light, started to push back the ancient reign of night, something profound began to shift. That precious quiet interlude, the dorveille, began to shrink. The workday became regimented, demanding a consolidated block of rest to fuel a consolidated block of labor. Historians still argue whether this societal pressure for a single, efficient sleep was the primary driver, or if the sheer novelty and convenience of affordable artificial illumination, allowing for extended evenings of activity, played an equal, perhaps more seductive, part in re-engineering our slumber. We gained longer days, a society that prided itself on never truly sleeping, on its 24/7 productivity. But you can't help but wonder, as you sit here in your own quiet space, what was lost in that transition? What delicate thoughts? What quiet epiphanies? What nascent creative sparks that might have flickered to life in that gentle, liminal state were snuffed out along with the widespread use of candles for essential lighting, that unique space for unhurried reflection, for low-pressure creative mulling, for simply being, without the insistent modern demand to do, to optimize, to achieve. It feels like a casualty of our relentless pursuit of consolidated efficiency. It makes you think, doesn't it, about all those times you might wake in the deep of night, a flicker of anxiety in your chest because you're not sleeping properly. Perhaps you're not broken. Perhaps your body is just dimly remembering an ancient, deeply ingrained rhythm, an echo of a time when that wakefulness was a gift, not a failing. In the mainstream historical fact, Orma, as documented by scholars like A. Roger E. Kirch through meticulous study of diaries, medical texts, legal depositions, and even works of literature from before the 19th century, is that this segmented sleep was utterly commonplace, the undisputed norm across Western societies for centuries, if not millennia. And for a quirky, lesser-known tidbit, some personal accounts and medical advice from the period even suggested that the dorveille was an ideal time for scholarly work or complex problem solving because the mind was considered clear and refreshed after the first sleep, yet still detached from the full bustle of daytime concerns. Imagine trying to sell that to your boss. Sorry I'm late. I was waiting for my optimal post-first sleep cognitive window. Probably wouldn't fly. Understanding this different way to sleep, truly letting it sink in, it sort of recalibrates your own internal assumptions about what normal rest looks like, doesn't it? Suddenly, waking at 3 a.m. doesn't necessarily feel like a symptom of modern stress or a prelude to a ruined day. Instead, it could be seen as an echo from a past where that very experience was an integral part of the human condition, a quiet beat in the symphony of the night. It challenges the modern tyranny of the uninterrupted 8-hour block, making you perhaps a little more forgiving of your own nocturnal stirrings. Maybe you're not an insomniac. Perhaps, as we joked earlier, you're just, historically, a lentelers, your body still tuned to a pre-industrial frequency. It's like our ancestors left us a sleep playlist with an intermission, and we're all trying to skip to the next track. This journey into the medieval night, peering into their homes and habits, isn't just about cataloging quaint, old-fashioned customs. It's about recognizing the incredible plasticity of human experience and biology. What we often hold up as immutable, natural ways of being, like how we sleep, are so often shaped by the cultural, technological, and economic landscapes we inhabit. Reflecting on their segmented sleep, their acceptance of the night's rhythms, it doesn't necessarily mean we should all try to force ourselves back into a biphasic pattern, abandoning our comfortable mattresses for a straw pallet next to a snoring pig, though. Points for authenticity if you do. Rather, it's about appreciating the diverse ways humans have found to live, to rest, and to simply exist. It encourages us to question our own norms, to wonder if our current model is the only, or even the best way. Perhaps there's a gentle wisdom in that old pattern, a reminder of the value of quiet, of darkness, of a pause in the relentless forward momentum of life. It's a profound shift in perspective, seeing our present not as the ultimate destination, but as just one point on a very long, ever-unfolding timeline of human experience, all lived beneath that same vast, indifferent canopy of stars we imagined when we first stepped out into that medieval evening. So long ago in our journey. Wind down. And now, as our own journey through these shadowed centuries draws to its close, let the images we've conjured begin to soften, to gently fade, like the last glow of embers in a medieval hearth. Feel the quietness of that ancient night settle around you, a deep and peaceful stillness. The stories have been told, the paths explored. There's nothing more to do, nothing more to see, just the lingering sense of a time when the world, and its asleep, moved at a different pace. Allow your own breath to deepen, to lengthen, as you drift away from these thoughts, carrying with you perhaps a newfound peace with the night and all its quiet possibilities, letting go, just easing down.